such a simple melody, but the melody of someone's life, the salvation of someone's life, and this instrument, the salvation. Good afternoon. My name is Mona Golabek, and I'm a pianist. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so incredibly honored to be here today at this think tank and to be part of the Mann Institute. My gratitude to the Mann Institute is boundless because they've given me the opportunity to take my mother's story and share it with so many others and fulfill my purpose. I'm a pianist, and my mother taught me the piano, and she was amazing. Her name was Lisa Yora. She always told me that each piece of music tells a story, but you have to discover what that story is. So in the piano lessons, in between the Beethoven and the Chopin and the Grieg, she would tell me about the story of her life, the mysterious characters that she encountered in England after she escaped on a train called the Kindertransport, and how she held on to her piano, how she held on to her music. That got her through the darkest period in her life and perhaps in history. So what was it? Well, she was 14 years old in Vienna in the 1930s, the Vienna of Mozart and Schubert and Mahler, and it was a Friday afternoon. That's when my story begins. And she boards a trolley. She's dressed to the nines. Why? It's the most important hour of her week. It's her piano lesson, and she has to look divine. And she loves this trolley ride because it takes her to the center of the city and St. Stephen's Cathedral rising to the heavens. And then when the trolley passes Symphony Hall, she closes her eyes just as she does every Friday, and she imagines she's on the stage of this great hall, the Musikverein, about to make her debut in the Grieg piano concerto, that theme. Most importantly, in the first row are her parents, Malka, Abraham, and her sisters Rosie and Sonia. They're going to experience this debut. The timpani erupts and the orchestra begins. And then the orchestra plays that theme that I just said was the theme of her life. And then she plays it. And so many years later, she would teach it to me. Strasse. Well, my mother looks up and sees that the street sign had been changed. It was always called Mahlerstrasse, named for Gustav Mahler, the Jewish composer. But now it was named for a Wagnerian opera, and she could see the darkness that was taking over her city. And on that day, she learned that the magical ride was gone and her world was crushed because the Nazis were coming in. She learned that her teacher couldn't teach her anymore because there were new ordinances against the Jews, and she was crushed. She told me how she left the apartment, somehow made her way home, and came back into the apartment, and the only thing that she could do was to go back to that piano. That was her salvation. She plucked out the chords of the Grieg. My grandmother came forth and said to her, "I'll teach you, I taught you before, let's make music together." "I can't, Mama." "What do you mean you can't? Have you forgotten what I've taught you? The music will give you strength. Hold on to this piano." And my grandmother played a beautiful Chopin nocturne. It was so beautiful that my mother sat down next to her and they played side by side. Smashed the piano to give you a sense of what took place on Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. And families were so desperate, Jewish families were desperate to find a way to save their children. And a rescue operation began called the Kindertransport, the children's train. And every Jewish family in Vienna was desperate to get a place on one of those trains to save their child. And one night, my grandfather came home bloodied and shirts torn and trousers ripped, and announced to my grandmother that he had won one ticket at a poker game. And now the most horrible decision awaited the family. One ticket. They argued. Who would it be? Would it be Rosie, the 17-year-old sister? Would it be Sonia, the baby, 12 years old? Or would it be my mother, Lisa Yura, 14 years old, who had her music? My mother played this piece that I'm playing for you right now. It's called Clair de Lune by Debussy, and it means moonlight. She had gone to the piano because she couldn't take the fighting of her parents any longer over the decision of who would they choose. And then she looked up. She saw her mother, her father, her sisters, standing right here, watching and listening to her. She turned and she saw the tears in her mother's eyes, and she knew. They had chosen her. They were going to send her away. My mother began to cry. She was terrified. But then my grandmother told her it was a chance for her to have a new teacher, an English piano teacher in London where there were no ordinances, and that in no time the family would follow. She was somewhat excited, a new teacher, the Grieg piano concerto, but her family, how soon would they be coming? How could she leave them? People were being arrested. People were disappearing. What would give her the strength to get on that train? My mom told me over and over in those piano lessons, and when she would put me to sleep at night, about that last day at the train station, the Westbahnhof train station, which was so crowded with panicked families. And my grandmother took my mother's face in her hands and said, "Lisa, you must make me a promise. Never stop playing the piano. Hold on to your music. I'll be with you every step of the way through the music, with every beat, with every phrase, with every note, my darling. I will be with you." And as this train sped away, my mother looked down and found an envelope, and inside was a photograph of my grandmother, and she turned it over and saw the writing. "From the mother who will never forget you." Well, my mother took an amazing journey through Europe, finally making her way to England. I can't tell you the whole story, of course, today, but in a fantastic journey, she finally made her way to a hostel, a Jewish hostel, in the northern part of London, Willesden Green. The street was called Willesden Lane, and we call the story The Children of Willesden Lane. And I would find out many years later, when I decided that I wanted to tell her story, about that very first day when she walked up the steps into that hostel and really didn't notice anything. She didn't hear the cook in the kitchen singing. She really didn't notice the neighbors outside pruning in the gardens. She didn't hear the chatter of children. All she saw was a familiar object in the corner of the living room. And like a magnet, after being 1 year in England and not seeing a piano, she walked over to that piano. My mother began to play the beautiful slow movement of the Grieg piano concerto, the piece that she dreamed of making her debut in. The cook came out of the kitchen, startled by the music. The neighbors outside put down their gardening tools, and they listened as the music drifted towards them. And then, most importantly, one by one, the children came out of their rooms. There were dozens of them. They stood on the staircase in silence, listening to my mother. Each piece of music tells a story. And in that moment, my mother at the piano, playing, told the story of their lives, of the families that they had left behind, their brothers and sisters. Well, we all know the Blitz began, one of the most violent epics in England's history. And my mother would always tell me that as the bombings began and the blackout curtains were closed and the children were taken out of the hostel into the bomb shelter next door, my mother, in the commotion, would go down into the basement where the piano had been placed for safekeeping. No one noticed that she had gone down there. The bombings began and it was terrifying. But she played and held on to her music. Determined to keep her promise to her mother. Another smashing of the piano. To give you an idea of what happened one of the nights during the bombing when the hostel was destroyed. And these 30 children, refugees, who had come together and had become a family and sweethearts to each other, were scattered across London and England. Again began an amazing journey for my mother. But most importantly, when she was sent to live with a Quaker lady, she not only didn't have her family, she didn't have her friends at the hostel, but she didn't have her piano. And she was so lonely. Well, it's a long journey of what happened to my mother and the unbelievable willpower to hold on to her music and that piano and make her way through the darkness to an audition at the London Royal Academy of Music, to gain a scholarship, and ultimately to fulfill the dream that she had on that trolley so many years earlier in Vienna. So when I wrote the book, The Children of Willesden Lane, I tried to imagine, what did my mother feel when she walked out on that stage in London, Wigmore Hall, so many years later, not knowing the fate of her family. And these were the words that I wrote. Her chords were somber yet noble. As she played, she imagined her mother lighting the Shabbos candles and her father reading a prayer. And then she sent her music across the footlights into the hearts of all who had come to listen that night. She saw their shining eyes, all her sewing partners from the factory, the RAF pilots, Mrs. Cohen, and all the children from Willesden Lane. Well, the little girl who was sent away and told to hold on to her piano was Lisa Jura, and she was my mother. And when I was a little girl, I would listen to my mother play this very piece of music. And one day, when I was engaged to play the Grieg piano concerto, I decided to tell her story. And I wrote a book. It will always be through the music that I pay tribute to my mother's life, to the grandparents that perished and that I never knew, and to every mother and father who had the courage to save their child by saying goodbye. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mona, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this inspiring story about intergenerational resilience. And I was sitting in the back thinking about the ghosts that certainly were there, and the angels that came in. All the intergenerational patterns, intergenerational stories that happen between all of us in our lives, and how we manage. Everyone needs to feel loved, to feel safe, to feel secure, to feel exclusive, and most of all, to feel connected to special people in one's life. Thank you for taking the time today to demonstrate resilience to us. The story is going to be in the LA Public Schools. Some of the buses you saw were buses that are taking students from the inner city where they will be learning about Lisa's story and about resilience and about finding a passion and about connection, finding a relationship with somebody that can make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.